Part 1. The Galactic Concord met in silence, high above the blue-green swirl of the planet Viridia, inside a vast orbital station shaped like a blooming flower. 200 alien species watched as the Cathari hegemony made its request. The air hummed with tension, not from sound but from the weight of what was being asked. The hegemony wanted help. Not just any help, they wanted humans. For 30 years Earth had been known to the galaxy. At first it was just a curious footnote, a young species that had barely left its homeworld when it was found. But Earth had changed fast. It built ships, learned alien languages, and joined trade routes. Still, most members of the Concord saw humans as loud, emotional, and messy. They argued too much, smiled too easily, and fought like cornered animals when pushed. That was why Counselor Lyra Vaughn stood now, her long silver robe shimmering under the soft lights, and spoke against the motion. "Humans are not ready," she said, her voice calm but firm. "They do not understand our wars. They do not follow our rules. If you bring them into this, you will not control them. You will only wake something you cannot put back to sleep." But the hegemony did not care. Their war with the Veln Collective had dragged on for 7 cycles. Planets burned. Supply lines snapped. Their soldiers grew tired. They needed fresh fighters, ones who did not ask too many questions. And humans, they had heard, asked very few when bullets started flying. The vote passed by a narrow margin. A delegation would go to Earth, not to demand, not to threaten, but to offer advanced weapons, faster ships, full membership in the Concord, all in exchange for human soldiers. On Earth, the message arrived in Geneva, inside a sealed chamber beneath the old United Nations building. Paul Dawson sat at the table, his hands folded, his face unreadable. He was 42, with short brown hair and eyes that had seen too many drills that turned real. He wore the dark blue uniform of the United Earth Defense Corps, though the Corps had not fired a shot in anger since the Martian border incident 20 years ago. Peace had been good to Earth, but peace, Paul knew, never lasted. The alien envoy, a tall Cathari with smooth gray skin and eyes like polished obsidian, laid out the offer. "Your people are strong," it said, its voice translated through a small device on its chest. "You adapt quickly. You do not break under pressure. We need that." "The galaxy needs that," Paul listened. He did not nod. He did not smile. He asked only one question. "What happens if we say no?" The envoy hesitated. "Then you remain as you are. Watch from the edge. But know this, when the dust settles, those who helped will shape what comes next. Those who did not will follow." Later, in a quiet room with rain tapping against the windows, Paul met with Nina Ruiz. She was not a soldier. She was a linguist, a cultural analyst, and one of the few humans who could read Cathari script without a translator. She had been studying the war logs the hegemony provided to the Concord, official records of battles, losses, and strategies. "I don't trust them," she said, her fingers tapping a data pad. "Look here. This battle near the Helios Rift. They claim the Veln attacked first, but the energy signatures don't match Veln weapons. They match hegemony plasma lances. And this refugee camp, they say, was destroyed by Veln bombers? The crater patterns suggest orbital strikes from hegemony-class ships." Paul frowned. "Are you sure?" 98%, she said. "The rest is gut feeling. And my gut says they started this war. Now they're losing, so they want us to clean up their mess." Back on Viridia Prime, Counselor Vaughn received a private message from a source inside the hegemony fleet. It confirmed Nina's findings. The war had been provoked. False flags, staged attacks, all to justify expansion. Vaughn knew she had to act, but the Concord moved slowly. Too slowly. On Earth, global leaders argued in hushed tones. Some saw the offer as a chance to finally stand equal among the stars. Others feared becoming pawns in a war they didn't understand. In the end, they told Paul to prepare a response, but not to commit. Just to listen. Just to learn, Paul agreed. He would go with the hegemony delegation to the front lines, not as a soldier yet, as an observer. Nina would go with him. Her job was to watch, listen, and report back everything that did not fit the official story. 3 days later, they boarded the hegemony cruiser, Iron Maw. It was massive, cold, and built for war. No windows, no comforts, just corridors of gray metal and the constant hum of engines. The Cathari crew barely spoke to them. When they did, it was with stiff formality. As the ship jumped into faster-than-light travel, Paul stood in his small quarters, staring at a photo on his wrist screen. His younger sister, laughing on a beach in California. She had no idea he was leaving the solar system. No one did, not really. Earth still thought of space as something distant, something for scientists and dreamers. But Paul knew better. Space was where wars began now. And if humans stepped into it carelessly, they might not come back the same. Nina, meanwhile, sat in the ship's data hub, quietly copying every file she could access. She found logs marked restricted, battle plans with strange gaps, and supply manifests that listed weapons never used in the reported battles. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The Iron Maw arrived at the Helios Rift 3 days later. The moment they dropped out of warp, alarms blared. A Veln scout fleet had spotted them. The hegemony captain barked orders. Shields rose. Weapons charged. Paul and Nina were ordered to the observation deck. Through a reinforced screen, they watched as hegemony destroyers opened fire. Not on military targets, but on a nearby mining colony that had declared neutrality. Explosions bloomed across the surface. No warning, no evacuation. This is not defense, Paul said quietly. This is punishment. Nina's hands trembled as she recorded everything. They're not fighting a war, she whispered. They're running a slaughter. And in that moment, both of them understood. The hegemony did not want human soldiers. They wanted human shields, human chaos, human rage they could point to later and say, see, even the primitives agree with us. But they had made one mistake. They thought humans would follow orders. They did not know that humans, once they saw the truth, rarely followed anyone. Part 2. The Iron Maw shuddered as another blast struck its shields. Outside, the Veln scout ships darted like angry insects, firing precise bursts at weak points in the hegemony cruiser's armor. Paul gripped the railing of the observation deck, his jaw tight. Nina stood beside him, her eyes locked on the data feed scrolling across her wrist screen. She wasn't watching the battle, she was watching the ship's internal systems. They're not routing power to the aft shields, she said suddenly. They're saving it for weapons. They don't care if the engine section takes damage. Paul turned to a nearby Cathari officer. Tell your captain to reinforce the rear. That's where they'll hit next. The officer blinked slowly, then walked away without answering. Moments later, a Veln plasma torpedo slammed into the ship's tail. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered. The deck tilted as gravity stabilizers failed. Smoke filled the corridors. Crew members ran, shouting in their guttural tongue. Paul didn't wait for orders. He grabbed Nina's arm and pulled her toward the engineering bay. He'd studied hegemony ship layouts during the trip. He knew where the main power couplings were. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. 2 Cathari engineers lay unconscious. Sparks shot from a shattered control panel. The backup generator was offline, and the primary reactor was overheating. If it blew, the whole ship would go. Paul didn't speak Cathari, but he pointed at the broken coolant valve and mimed turning it. One of the conscious engineers shook his head. Protocol required a full diagnostic before manual override. Paul ignored him. He yanked open a panel, found the valve, and twisted it with both hands. Metal burned his palms, but the hiss of coolant filled the room. Nina, meanwhile, had pulled a small toolkit from her belt. She bypassed the safety lock on the generator using a trick she'd learned from an old Earth submarine manual, cross-wiring the ignition sequence to force a cold restart. It shouldn't have worked on alien tech, but it did. Within minutes, lights returned. Gravity stabilized. The ship's AI announced that warp drive was back online. The Cathari crew stared at the 2 humans like they'd just performed magic. The captain arrived, his face unreadable. He looked at the repaired systems, then at Paul. You acted without command, he said through his translator. Yes, Paul replied. And your ship is still flying because of it. The captain said nothing for a long moment. Then he gave a short nod. Humans are not like other species. News of the repair spread fast. By the next cycle, human names were whispered in mess halls and command centers. Not with fear, but with something new. Respect. Back on Viridia Prime, Counselor Vaughn received a report from a neutral observer aboard the Iron Maw. It described how 2 humans had saved the ship using methods that defied standard procedure. Methods that should have failed, but didn't. She filed the report under high priority and requested a private audience with the Concord Oversight Committee. But not everyone was impressed. High Marshal Drak of the Hegemony War Council saw the incident differently. To him, humans were unpredictable, dangerous. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't follow chains of command. That made them useful, but also hard to control. He ordered his intelligence division to dig deeper into Earth's history. What they found disturbed him. Humans had fought wars on their own planet for thousands of years, not just with weapons, but with ideas, with lies, with songs and symbols. They turned enemies into friends and friends into traitors with words alone. They rebuilt cities in months after leveling them in days. They never stayed down. Still, the hegemony needed them. So Drak approved a new plan. Embed human observers in 3 frontline vessels. Give them limited access. Study them. And if they proved useful, offer them real roles. Paul and Nina were assigned to stay aboard the Iron Maw for another rotation. Officially, they were still observers. Unofficially, the crew began asking them for advice. When a supply drone malfunctioned, Nina reprogrammed its navigation chip using Earth-based logic trees. When a boarding party from a Veln raider breached Deck 7, Paul organized a counter-ambush using smoke, pellets and redirected ventilation fans, tactics the Cathari had never considered. The Veln raiders were captured in under 10 minutes. During a quiet moment in the mess hall, a young Cathari engineer named Tael sat across from Paul. "Why do you fight like this?" he asked. "You use so little. You waste nothing." Paul stirred his drink, a bitter hegemony brew that tasted like burnt metal. On Earth, we learned that wars aren't won by the strongest. They're won by the smartest, the fastest, and the ones who care the most about going home. Tael didn't understand all the words, but he understood the tone. He nodded slowly. Meanwhile, Nina kept digging. She found encrypted logs hidden in the ship's medical database. They recorded civilian casualties from hegemony strikes, numbers far higher than reported. She copied the files onto a micro drive disguised as a hair clip. She knew she couldn't send it openly. The hegemony monitored all outgoing signals, but she remembered something Paul had told her. In a war, the truth is the first weapon you lose and the last one you find. She waited, watched, listened. Then, during a routine comms check with a neutral freighter, she slipped the data into a garbage packet, a bundle of useless system noise that all ships automatically discarded. But this one wasn't useless. Buried in the static was the truth. The freighter, registered to a free trader from the Zenthari block, received the packet. Its captain, an old friend of Counselor Vaughn, recognized the pattern. He forwarded it directly to her. Within hours, Vaughn had proof. Not just suspicion, proof. She called for an emergency session, but before she could present the evidence, the hegemony struck again. This time, they targeted a human research outpost near Proxima Centauri. It was unarmed, officially neutral, but the hegemony claimed it was harboring Veln spies. Their orbital strike killed 17 scientists, including 2 children. Earth's global council erupted in outrage. Paul received a coded message from Geneva. Recall authorized. Return immediately. But Paul didn't leave, not yet. He asked the captain for permission to visit the strike site, to see it himself. The captain, under pressure from his superiors, agreed but sent 2 armed guards with him. What Paul saw on the surface broke something inside him. The lab was gone. Only melted metal and blackened rock remained. Among the rubble, he found a scorched toy, a small plastic dog half melted, its eyes still staring up at the sky. He picked it up, held it tight. Back on the ship, he told Nina everything. She didn't cry. She got quiet. That was worse. That night, she sent another data burst, not to Vaughn, but to every independent news node she could reach. She included the toy's image, the names of the dead, the coordinates, the lie. The message spread like fire through dry grass. On a dozen worlds, citizens gathered in plazas, holding up images of the toy dog. Protests began. Even some hegemony client species questioned their leaders. High Marshal Drak was furious. He ordered Paul and Nina confined to quarters. But before the guards arrived, Counselor Vaughn broadcast a public statement across the entire Concord network. "Humanity did not ask for this war," she said, her voice steady. "But if you force them into it, do not expect them to play by your rules. They will not. They cannot. And once they choose a side, they will not stop until it is over." Paul stood at his window watching stars blur past as the Iron Maw turned toward Earth. He knew the war wasn't his to fight. Not yet. But he also knew something the hegemony had missed. Humans didn't need permission to protect their own, and they never forgot a debt. For sure, Paul stepped off the shuttle onto Earth's soil and felt the weight of the sky press down on him. It wasn't the gravity, he'd been home before, but the silence. No alarms, no alien voices. Just whine through the trees and the distant hum of a city that didn't know how close the edge really was. He carried the melted toy dog in his pocket. He hadn't told anyone about it. Not yet. In Geneva, Earth's unified command met behind sealed doors. The Proxima strike had changed everything. Public anger burned hot. Politicians demanded action. But action meant war, and Earth wasn't ready for a real war with a galactic power. So they chose the middle path. Refuse all further cooperation with the hegemony, withdraw observers, and declare strict neutrality. Paul agreed with the decision. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. Back on Viridia Prime, the Conquered reacted fast. Fearing Earth might side with the Veln or, worse, act alone, they voted to place Earth under quarantine. No human ships could leave the Sol system without inspection. No alien vessels could land on Earth without Conquered approval. Humanity was locked in, labeled unstable, and stripped of its observer status. The official reason was to prevent escalation. The real reason was fear. Nina, now stranded on Viridia after the Iron Maw left without her, watched the vote from a public gallery. She felt sick. They weren't punishing the hegemony. They were punishing humans for telling the truth. That night she met with Joran Tal, a Cathari data clerk who had grown disgusted with his own government. He'd seen the falsified reports. He'd helped bury them. Now he wanted out. "They're watching you," he whispered in a dim corridor near the archive wing. "Not just the hegemony. The Concord, too. They think you'll leak more." "I already did," Nina said. Joran handed her a small crystal chip. "This is the full war log. From day one. Every false flag. Every civilian target. Every lie. It's encrypted, but your people can break it. I've seen what your engineers do with broken tech." She took it. "Why help us?" "Because I have a daughter," he said. "And if the hegemony keeps this up, there won't be a galaxy left for her to grow up in." 2 nights later, Joran vanished. The hegemony claimed he'd been reassigned. Nina knew better. She didn't wait. She smuggled the chip into a diplomatic courier drone bound for Earth, hidden inside a routine maintenance request. Then she disappeared into Viridia's lower levels, where species without papers lived in the shadows. On Earth, Paul received the chip. He didn't open it himself.
He gave it to Captain Lena Ruiz, Nina's older sister and head of Earth's Cyber Intel Division.
Within hours, she confirmed its contents. The truth was worse than they'd imagined. The hegemony hadn't just started the war. They'd planned it for decades, waiting for the right moment to crush the Veln and claim their resources. Paul called an emergency meeting with retired officers, freighter captains, and former colony security teams. No government officials, no politicians, just people who knew how to move quietly and hit hard. "We're not declaring war," he told them, "but we're not sitting still either. If the hegemony thinks Earth is out of the game, let them keep thinking that." What followed wasn't an army. It was something older, something messier, a network. Human freighters began accidentally drifting into hegemony patrol zones, then vanishing into asteroid fields. Independent mining rigs near the outer spiral reported strange comms interference, later traced to modified Earth jammers. And 3 hegemony supply depots mysteriously exploded, their security footage showing only blurred figures in civilian gear. The hegemony blamed Veln saboteurs. But their analysts weren't fooled. The tactics were too chaotic, too creative. Only humans fought like that, using garbage drones as decoys, hacking coolant systems to freeze doors shut, leaving behind nothing but scorched metal and riddles. Back on Viridia, Nina sent another message, this time through a Zinthari trader. It wasn't data. It was a warning. They're coming for Earth, not with ships. With lies, she was right. The hegemony began broadcasting edited footage across neutral channels. In the clips, human ships fired on Veln hospitals. Human soldiers executed prisoners. The images were fake but convincing. Public opinion shifted. Even some Veln factions began to doubt Earth's neutrality. Paul knew they had to respond. But not with words. With proof. He gathered a small team and took a stealth-modified freighter, the Dawn Runner, to the Helios Rift. There they found a hegemony listening post disguised as a derelict satellite. Inside, they recovered raw footage of the Proxima strike, showing hegemony ships firing first with no warning. They also found logs proving the fake human attack videos were created in a studio on Kethar Prime. They didn't destroy the post. They left it intact, with the real files uploaded to every open network in the sector. Within a day, the truth spread. The fake videos collapsed under scrutiny. The hegemony scrambled to explain, but no one believed them anymore. The Concord called another emergency session. This time, even hegemony allies stayed silent. Counselor Vaughn stood and played the Proxima footage on the main screen. The room was quiet for a long time. Then she said what everyone was thinking. We tried to silence the humans. Instead, they showed us our own blindness, but the damage was done. Earth was still quarantined, and the war raged on. Then something unexpected happened. Veln scouts began appearing near human colonies, not to attack, but to trade. They brought medical supplies, rare minerals, and encrypted messages. One message was for Paul. It read, "We know who our real enemies are, and who our real friends might become." Paul didn't reply, but he didn't turn them away either. In hidden shipyards across the asteroid belt, human engineers worked through the night. They weren't building warships, not yet. They were upgrading old freighters with stealth plating, signal scramblers, and modular weapon mounts. Just in case. Nina, still hiding on Viridia, watched the stars from a rooftop in the lower district. She missed Earth, she missed her sister, but she knew she couldn't go back, not while the truth was still caged. She sent one last message before cutting her link. "Tell Paul I'm still in the fight. And tell him. Don't wait for permission next time." Paul read it in his office in Geneva. He folded the note and put it in his pocket next to the melted toy dog. Outside, the sun rose over the mountains. Somewhere in the dark between stars, human ships moved without flags, without orders, without fear. And the galaxy began to wonder, if humans weren't in the war yet, what would happen when they truly joined? Part 4. The Veln Collective did not send an official request. They did not use diplomats or formal channels. Instead, a single unmarked vessel drifted into the edge of the Sol system and released a data capsule. It contained no demands, no speeches, just schematics, coordinates, and a list of hegemony weak points. At the bottom of the file was a simple line. "We fight the same enemy. You know how to hurt them. We know where." Paul read the message 3 times before showing it to anyone. He knew what it meant. This wasn't an alliance. It was an invitation to chaos, and humans were very good at chaos. He called Lena Ruiz, Nina's sister, and a handful of trusted pilots and engineers. No government approval. No records. Just a quiet meeting in an old hangar on Mars, where rusted mining drones stood like silent sentinels. There they made a choice. They would not wear uniforms. They would not carry Earth's flag. But they would act. Within a week, the first human-Veln joint strike happened. Not on a battlefield, but on a hegemony data nexus orbiting Cygnus Reach. The target held every war plan, every fleet schedule, every secret the hegemony had buried. Taking it by force would be impossible. So Paul didn't try. He used old Earth tricks. His team sent out dozens of cheap solar-powered drones painted to look like damaged freighters. The hegemony sensors flagged them as junk, but hidden inside each drone was a micropulse emitter. When triggered together, they created a false signal, a fake surrender broadcast from a non-existent human fleet. The hegemony command, eager to capture rebel humans, diverted 2 patrol wings to investigate. That left the data nexus lightly guarded, while the hegemony chased ghosts. 3 human-piloted stealth corvettes, gifted by the Veln and retrofitted with Earth-made jamming tech, slipped past the outer defenses. Paul led the team. They didn't fire a shot. They didn't need to. Using stolen access codes from Jorantal's files, they bypassed the security locks and uploaded a virus that didn't destroy data. It copied it, then sent it out in 1,000 directions at once. By the time the hegemony realized what happened, the entire war archive was public. Every lie, every massacre, every order signed by High Marshal Drak himself, the fallout was instant. Client worlds rebelled. Trade routes collapsed. Even loyal hegemony soldiers began questioning their orders. On Kethar Prime, protests turned violent. The war machine was breaking from the inside. Back on Earth, governments pretended they knew nothing. But in secret they smiled. They had not sent Paul. They had not approved the mission. But they would reap the rewards. Nina, still hiding on Viridia, received fragments of the leaked data through underground channels. She compiled them into a single file and sent it to every school, news hub, and public archive she could reach. She called it the Truth Archive. Within days, it was being taught in classrooms across neutral worlds. Children drew pictures of the melted toy dog. Teachers spoke of Proxima not as a tragedy but as a warning. The hegemony tried to silence her. They tracked her signal to a low-level comms hub in Viridia's Undercity, but when their agents arrived, she was gone. All they found was a note taped to the wall. You can delete files. You can't delete memory. Paul didn't rest. He knew the hegemony would retaliate. And they did. They bombed a Velen refugee convoy near the Orion Veil, then blamed human mercenaries. But this time, no one believed them. Independent observers confirmed the weapons used were hegemony-made. The lie collapsed before it could spread. Frustrated, Drock ordered a new strategy. Target human supply lines. Cut off their fuel. Isolate their ships. Make them regret ever leaving Earth. But humans didn't rely on supply lines. They used what they had. Old freighters became mobile repair stations. Asteroid ice became water and oxygen. Scrap metal became armor. And every pilot carried a small Earth-made device that could mimic any ship's signal for 10 minutes, just long enough to vanish. In one famous raid, a human crew boarded a hegemony fuel depot by pretending to be a damaged patrol ship. Once inside, they didn't steal fuel. They poisoned it with a harmless but detectable chemical tracer. Every hegemony ship that used it glowed faintly in infrared for weeks. Velen scouts used the glow to track and ambush entire squadrons. The hegemony lost 7 ships in 3 days. Their commanders called it ghost warfare. Counselor Vaughn watched it all from Viridia. She no longer spoke in meetings. She simply played recordings of human operations, silent, efficient, brutal in their simplicity. You wanted soldiers, she told the hegemony delegate once. You got something else. Something that doesn't follow your rules, your ranks, or your reasons. On Earth, more volunteers joined Paul's network. Not soldiers, teachers, medics, mechanics. They didn't want glory. They wanted justice. They repaired Velen ships in hidden bays. They taught refugee children in orbiting shelters. And when hegemony scouts came too close, they vanished into the dark, leaving only static and silence. Paul never gave interviews. He never took credit, but his name spread anyway. To the hegemony, he was a terrorist. To the Velen, a hero. To humans, just a man who refused to look away. One night, aboard the Dawn Runner, he received a message from Nina. It was short. They're scared of you. Not because you're strong, because you're free. He smiled for the first time in months. The war was changing. Not because of fleets or firepower, but because humans had entered it not as an army but as an idea. And ideas, once loose, could not be caged. The hegemony began pulling back from outer colonies. Their soldiers grew hesitant. Their leaders argued behind closed doors. And across the galaxy, people whispered a new truth. If you want to end a war, don't send a diplomat. Send a human. Wissam, the war did not end with a battle. It ended with a silence. One morning, across the Helios Rift, hegemony ships stopped firing. Their comms went dark. No orders came from Kether Prime. Confused commanders waited. Then, slowly, they powered down their weapons and raised white signal flares, the oldest sign of surrender, borrowed from Earth's own history. High Marshal Drock was gone. Not dead, not captured, just gone. Rumor said he fled to the outer dark where no law reached. The Hegemony War Council collapsed under its own weight. Without lies to feed it, the war starved. The Velen Collective did not celebrate. They sent a single message to Paul. It is over. But we do not ask for peace. We ask for truth. Paul knew what that meant. They wanted justice, not victory. And justice, he understood, was harder to give. He returned to Earth not as a hero, but as a quiet man with tired eyes. Reporters waited at the spaceport. He walked past them without a word. Later, in a small apartment in Colorado, he placed the melted toy dog on a shelf beside a photo of the Proxima scientists. He did not speak of what he had done. He did not need to. On Viridia Prime, the Concord held its final session on the war. Counselor Lyra Vaughn stood before the full assembly, her silver robes catching the light from 1,000 alien suns. She did not read from notes. She spoke from memory. For 30 cycles, we believed order came from rules, she said. We built treaties, borders, and laws to keep the peace. But peace is not made by rules. It is made by people who refuse to look away when others suffer. Humanity did not start this war. But they ended it, not with more weapons, but with more truth. She paused. The chamber was utterly still. We tried to use them. We tried to silence them. We tried to lock them away. And in doing so, we learned the hardest lesson. You cannot control a species that values freedom more than safety, truth more than power, and home more than glory. Then she said the words that would be carved into conquered law for generations. From this day forward, no member of this council shall recruit, conscript, or involve humans in any armed conflict, not because they are weak, but because once they enter a war, they do not fight to win. They fight to end it, and when they are done, nothing is the same. The motion passed unanimously. Earth was reinstated, not as a junior member, but as a protected neutral. All military contact with humans was banned. Even observation required special permission. Nina Ruiz finally came home. She stepped off the shuttle in Geneva and hugged her sister Lena so hard they both cried. She refused all interviews. She wrote one book anonymously called The Uninvited Clause. It told no names, no battles, just the story of how one lie left unchecked can burn a galaxy. It became required reading in every conquered academy. Paul never wore a uniform again. He taught navigation to young pilots in a community college near Denver. He never mentioned the war. But sometimes when students asked how to handle impossible odds, he'd say, use what you have, trust your people, and never forget why you're fighting. Across the galaxy, things changed. The Veln rebuilt their worlds with human engineers helping in quiet ways, designing water purifiers, solar grids, schools. No flags, no fanfare, just work. The hegemony was broken into smaller states, each required to open its archives and face public trials for war crimes. Many of the files used came from the Truth Archive Nina had spread. Justice was slow, but it came. And in the shadows, human ships still moved. Not as soldiers, but as traders, medics, explorers. They carried no weapons, but everyone knew. If trouble came, humans would not stand by. They never had. Years later, a young Cathari cadet asked an old Veln veteran how the war truly ended. The veteran smiled and said, "We stopped fighting when we realized the humans weren't on anyone's side. They were on the side of right. And that side always wins, just not the way you expect." Back on Earth, children played under open skies, unaware of the fire that had almost reached their world. In classrooms, teachers spoke of the war not as a victory, but as a warning. Never let fear make your choices, they said. And never trust a war that starts with a lie. Paul sat on his porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. A message blinked on his old wrist screen, a simple line from Nina. They still talk about us out there, but now they say it with respect. He closed the screen and looked up at the stars. They were quiet, peaceful. For now, and somewhere in the vast dark between worlds, a human freighter hummed softly as it delivered medicine to a colony that once feared them. No one saluted, no one cheered, but the people there slept safer that night because the galaxy had learned its lesson. Do not involve humans in your wars, not because they will lose, but because once they join, the war ends and the world that follows is one you may not recognize.